welcome back to Bivdub's Dawn Stuff. Today we'll be talking about 1995's Anvil of Dawn, a blobber-adjacent dungeon crawler developed by Dreamforge and published by New World Computing. I say blobber-adjacent because unlike the blobbers we looked at last time, you only control a single character instead of a party. Dreamforge Intertainment, formerly Event Horizon, had a string of commercially and critically successful games in the RPG, RTS, and adventure game genre during the 90s. They tended to have a dark fantasy tilt to them, which we'll be seeing in Anvil of Dawn as well. It feels kinda weird to me that this game wasn't published by SSI, who Dreamforge worked with frequently and published a number of RPG and RTS games with. Actually, probably their most frequent collaborator. But this one was published by New World Computing, who I'm sure needs no introduction to a crew of gamers like yourself, as they're the developer behind classics like Planet's Edge and multimedia Celebrity Poker. Anyways, the game's antagonist is about to give a speech. I say we hear him out. I never want to trust the game on who the bad guy is.
Soon we storm out of desolation, across the star. Gorge Keep shall fall. Then Tempest is yours. The green valleys, the rich lands, yours!
Well, so far I'm not hearing any problems.
The dark gods favor you, and they have promised a gift. By this gift, we shall control the elements, crush our foes, and destroy their lands. Now, behold!
Okay, now I know they're trying to frame it like these are the bad guys, but clearly they're an oppressed people who can barely afford jockstraps. And I'm sure the Dark God saying is just a, hey, is that a pile of corpses? Never mind. Yeah, no, that's a hole in the sky eating souls. Let's just move on.
Our Lady must gather her council. Plans must be made. Fate has set its roots in the present. It begins.
Actually, it begins after a bunch more kinda boring exposition. Although this organ music does slam. We'll talk about the music considerably later. I'm required to say we'll talk about something later within the first 5 minutes of a video. Anyways, on to character selection.
Yet great evil, such as we now face, can only be met and overcome with equally great sacrifice.
I think that's the game's nice way of saying don't get attached to any of these characters. Well, to start off with, we get 5 different characters to choose from, and well, I feel very seen by Bryce here. Something about him being a sloppy, giant, bearded white dude. I think I'm gonna pick Willem Dafoe. He has balanced stats, so I can figure out what kind of playstyle I like, and specialize into it as I go. Oh no. Well, I guess we'll save those for later.
Yours is the face of our enemy. If chosen, you must prove loyal to us, and more than the evil of your people.
Okay, that seems uncalled for. Let's get going. Oh, jeez. The sound effects in this game can be a little intense at times. Anyways, we start off the game having overslept, and immediately we find out that the game is fully voice acted, and in a luxurious decision for the mid-90s, not a single voice actor credited in the cast is a member of the development team.
Would he be asking me to a breakfast?
Although I'm pretty sure my beautiful green boy here is just the normal male player character voice with some filters on it. That's fine by me, as it makes the voice actor David J. Fielding sound more like his most famous role, Zordon on Power Rangers.
Good omen or bad, the time has come for you to leave.
Oh man, he's right. We're like 5 minutes in and we haven't even got to gameplay yet. On the way to start our quest, we stop by the court magician and blacksmith who give us a spell and weapon of our choice. I mean, you get the heal spell, so it doesn't really matter which offensive spell you take. I just assume all spell systems are kind of worthless until they prove to me otherwise. But you better know that given the choice between sword, axes, polearms, and a ranged weapon, I'm obviously going to go with the axe.
Ah!
After arming ourselves, we go meet with the Old One, who tells us that he's the reason we overslept, which I feel deserves further exploration, but not right now. He tells us that we're his secret weapon being sent on a solo mission to hopefully avoid the gaze of the warlord. I guess it sucks to be the other 4 chumps in the starting lineup. He tells us to seek out someone in a post called the Dark Lantern, because
It is of incomparable value, not for itself, but for he who resides within. The Mage of the Dark Lantern.
oh man, I'm gonna start using that naming convention for myself too, and call myself the man-child of my best friend's condo. So let's head through the portal behind this guy and head into the first level of the game proper. Here we are. And hoo boy, if you can't get into the combat in this first level, I would recommend just go ahead and uninstall the game, because I got some bad news. This is about 90% of the combat loop in the game that you're looking at right now. I mentioned the blobber 2-step in the last video, and this game is like the most distilled version of it that I've ever run into. The game is more a test of vigilance than skill for the combat, at least against most of the enemies in the game. Some enemies can have a varying attack speed animation, which require you to do your 2-step at a different speed, or it may allow you to get multiple attacks in their wind-up animation before needing to dodge out of their hit window. But most of the enemies can be dealt with via the alluring dance of the blobber people. The pace of the combat in the game is intentionally designed in a way that allows the player to dictate its speed. So when a player lands an attack, the enemy goes into their attack animation after a short stun. Depending on the stun animation of the enemy and the attack animation of them, you can usually get 1 or 2 attacks in after you hit them, and if you hit them during their stun animation, it starts over again. So the variance in combat is kind of determined by how lucky you feel, in the sense that you can take your chance and stun lock the enemies. Anyways, that's enough of the initial gameplay impressions. Let's get this story on the road.
How is it that you live?
Death is near. It comes soon.
In between levels, we have pre-rendered overworld segments that link the different combat arenas. It looks a little bland, but it's a nice touch, and you frequently run into NPCs and a few secrets hidden in the overworld. So we hit the Dark Lantern and experience one of my favorite things about this game, the monster design. Namely that the monster design is kinda silly. I'll point out my favorites as we go, but our first award goes to the Slither Fist here. It really cements that our evil warlord powers here are more concerned with the aesthetics of their evilness than the practicality. Like, what's scary? Snakes and getting stabbed. With you so far. So, should we have the snake grab the knife with its tail and whip it around or something? No. Let's replace the part of the snake that's already dangerous and potentially venomous and designed for quick forward strikes, and replace it with something equally stabbish but wildly less effective in every way. A+ evil monster design, can't wait to get a plush toy of it. So at the top of the lantern we find the Mage of the Dark Lantern, and meet the other star of Anvil of Dawn, creative torment of NPCs. Our warlord is a bit of a jokester, it seems, and rather than relying on good old smashing to take care of those who resist him, we tend to find people in a series of creative hells in our path instead. Which is pretty convenient for us. We can't talk to a dead mage, but we can talk to an eternally tormented one. Well, he lets us know that we need to seek out a demon on a sunken ship nearby, who's the last known source of the IKEA instructions for creating a container that can seal the source of the Dark Warlord's power, the Dark Slag. Listen game, I know it was the mid-90s and we were all feeling bleak because the Cold War was over, the internet still had a bright future, and squirrel nut zippers were charting, but we still got like 20 hours left of this game. How about we ramp up the dark over time? We just need to go rummaging around the Dark Lantern's basement for a bit and find some sacred relics to summon a water elemental to grant us passage. This is also the first area that really features the puzzle mechanics of the game, but we'll talk about those later and keep this story moving along. along for now. So since the elemental is a bit of a joke, did I really write Joker right after calling someone a jokester? Since the elemental's kind of an asshole, it grants us passage via an underwater labyrinth in order to get to the ship. And this is the first of Dawn's levels that feels like a real drag. So let's talk about a conflux of design decisions that can cause some levels of this game to grind me down. The first is the illusion that you don't need to kill everything. So the exit to this area you actually need to get to is in the center of the labyrinth, which requires finding 8 pearls, which in return requires scouring every damn block of this maze, unless I guess you're a huge AOD speedrunner and know which chests and monsters have progress essential drops, in which case, drop a comment. I have questions about your life decisions that may help me self-actualize as well. The poison mechanic is also introduced in this level, and unlike most RPGs I can think of, this is not a time debuff. You will continue taking damage until you cure it with a potion, but you have a lot fewer potions than there are monsters that will poison you. So often you want to rush between poisoning enemies and kill them while you're still taking poison damage, and only cure it once you become desperate and low health. I mean, you can cure it whenever and hope for the best, but the enemies that poison you have a really high proc chance for the effect, and in this labyrinth level, the poisoning enemies are often positioned in a way that requires you to go into combat, rotate, hit them, then rotate out to avoid the attacks, since there's no strafing in this game. Alternatively, you can use one of the more useful spells in the game, the freeze spell, but if you don't kill them before they thaw, they will get a free hit, and might poison you anyways, like happens right here. So at least in this situation, it's really hard to avoid the attacks reliably that will poison you. So you have a situation where your life will likely end up low from poison now. No biggie, you have plenty of healing options. Well, 3 healing options. Healing potions, altars, and heal spells. Potions are the go-to, but limited in number. There's generally an altar in every level, but you may need to backtrack to it or unlock it, so that isn't always available, and it requires runes to activate, which are also limited. The heal spell is unlimited though. Well, kind of. Your mana will regen over time, but at a crawl. There were definitely times where I'd leave this game on and go make a snack or something and wait like 20 minutes for my mana to regen, rather than backtrack to an altar if my supplies were running low. I can be profoundly lazy at times. But don't worry, even if you're two-stepping like a champ and don't need to rest for mana, the stamina mechanic ensures that if you're playing the game too fast, it'll fix that for you. Continuous actions reduce an invisible stamina bar, and frankly, I'm kind of glad it's invisible, otherwise I feel like I may have caused some grievous destruction to my monitor where it was located. It just slowly drains your strength and agility, point by point, making you less likely to hit and do less damage until you pause and just hang out a while to let them recover. Don't think you can wander around while recovering either, because losing strength will probably leave you encumbered on most characters, which will cause your stamina to continue draining on movement until you either wait or ditch gear out of your bag to get yourself under encumbrance. Then I forget to save and accidentally start a conversation with this wet lady who murks my ass because I forgot to use an item to cast a protective resurrection on myself during conversation with So yeah, some levels can be a bit of a slog to power through, but not the pirate ship. All you gotta do in the pirate ship is murder drowned pirates until you get the 8 strongest hearts you can find and feed them to a demon, which frees him, so, we'll deal with that later. Actually, we won't, we never see him again. But he gives us our shopping list to get our evil-proof igloo cooler. Fortunately, the Undersea Labyrinth is like the second biggest drag of a level in the game. Unfortunately, the biggest drag is right after the short detour on the pirate ship. The underground city is huge, has a ton of locked doors, and was the first foray I had to take to walk through county because I missed a tiny item that dropped off a random mob that is the only way to open one of the doors on the complete other side of the map. These large open levels sometimes feel like mowing the lawn, as the best way to progress is just to find an uncovered area of the map and go there and hope for the best. For a game that is so accessible compared to many of its contemporaries in terms of gameplay, Anvil of Dawn lacks a lot of the design logic that leads the player's progression in a natural fashion. Something as small as having a palette swap or tougher versions of enemies that consistently dropped progression items, or even just having a sound effect on essential items dropping. Without these signals, it's really easy for playing this game to give you a kind of a version of highway hypnosis, where you just go on autopilot until something goes terribly wrong. I feel like I say this a lot, but this game would have had a lot better pacing between the story and gameplay sections if you stripped out like 25 to 50% of the combat encounters, because this game does have a lot of strengths, which we'll get to, but the combat is just about the least compelling aspect of the game, and there's so much of it. I feel like this game would be a lot easier to suggest to a modern audience if it was like a 15-hour playthrough rather than a 25-hour one. Well, that and remove some of the excessive key hunting that requires full clear-throughs of most levels, especially this early on in the game. But you know what doesn't suck? The auto map in this game. The fact it has a mini-map at all is welcome, but the real star is the full auto map. So a core aspect of the puzzle gameplay in Anvil of Dawn is invisible trap tiles. It's a pretty wide variety of types, including ones that fire off spells at a certain time, ones that reflect spells, ones that will spin the character around, and the most painful in my opinion, magic nullification fields. These will be insufferable at one point in the last level of the game, but they're always painful when you run into them because they still use mana when you cast. The spell just fizzles. Oh, there's actually one worse, but I think it's only in the mines underneath the underground city here. And that one drains your mana anytime you go into it, in an area where you need to cast a lot of spells to clear your path. However, this is where patience and awareness can be your friend, because all of those traps will be marked on your full auto map, each with a different symbol for each type of trap, which is pretty great for the time. Oh, an honorable mention for monster design goes to these underground fire-flinging harlequins. I have a theory that since they're one of the few enemies that will show up in multiple places and that they're always underground, that they aren't actually evil warlord forces, but they're more like naturally occurring burrowing predators like badgers or something. Okay, let's leave this cursed place and go to another cursed place. To be fair, I think every place in this game is cursed. So the path branches at this point, and to celebrate I'll head to the Elder Tree first. I mean, you have to go both routes, but eventually you can choose which route to commit to when you have to go to the final stretch of the game. From here on out, the game's pace feels breezier with a few exceptions. The puzzles are generally more interesting, even if they are still mostly door-opening puzzles. I had to occasionally rub a couple neurons together and use my map to figure out exactly what I needed to do. Although having to carry every boulder in an area with the expectation of them being needed for pressure plates is a prevalent annoyance as it exacerbates the stamina issues. Although sometimes you can sidestep this with a handy portable cube item. So this wood spirit at the top of the tree lets us know that if we cure the roots, the tree will give us passage into the warlord's territory and provide us one of the items that we need in order to complete the container to carry the dark slag. And as it turns out, yes, you can take poison damage during conversations.
Hold it, and it shall greatly increase your ability to heal.
So after adding fantasy botanist or fantasy arborist, one or the other, to my resume, I go and visit just the cutest little dragon.
Yes, the children love to see it. It is shy.
Look at that little guy. Hey buddy, you want to spit up some sparkles? I need them for my destroying all evil. Thank you. Well, we'll come back to the tree when we're ready to cross the scar into the warlord's territory, but for now we need to head to the other path and go to the fort that is the last bastion of Tempest defenses against the warlord. I mean, all of these defenders are locked in a throne room and the fort is overrun by giant baboons, which I will grant them are one of the gnarlier denizens of the game, but it still doesn't bode well for the forces of good.
Though you were of an evil race, your heart sounds
This shit
true.
again. You know what, just for that, I am going to take the rest of your supplies. Good luck, buddy! The baboons are probably one of the toughest enemies in the game. They're wildly tanky, do a decent chunk of damage, and most viciously, destroy your ears with all of their goddamn screaming! In one of the game's more memorable design decisions, you can cause all of the baboons to despawn if you free their king, since his captivity is the leverage the warlord is using to get them to fight for him. Although I did end up killing a lot more baboons than I needed to because I didn't realize I already had the key, so my bad. But to my credit, how was I supposed to know the key would take the shape of a withered hand?
I believe I have the key. It takes the shape of a withered hand.
Use it! My people wait!
Wait to get wrecked! After the fort, we take a detour to the Temple of the Moon and the City of the Dead. These areas are a little offshoot that give us a lot more of the items that we need to complete our container, as well as some of the best equipable items in the game. We'll keep description of this area short, except to point out some more MVP monsters in the Temple of the Moon, in the form of these flesh monstrosities that swallow souls, and these lovely diaper-clad owl boys in the upper levels. Just need to grab some soul houses here and collect some giant lady-faced tears, and we'll run into our first fellow adventurer on the way to the City of the Dead.
No more words. Get out of here.
That I swear I will do.
Well, I was gonna try and heal you, but I guess have fun dying. Let's take the next couple areas to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of the presentation and gameplay here. I feel like I've been pretty negative on the game so far, so let's go ahead and start with the artistic presentation first. As much as I make fun of some of the monster designs conceptually, they feature some of the best art and animation for a game of this type from the era that I can think of. The environment design is also top-notch and has a lot more variety than a lot of these dungeon crawlers did. Basically, every artistic design decision in the game is on point and does a lot of heavy lifting, keeping the playthrough interesting. The sound design is a bit intense if you leave the default music to SFX balance, and the audio is a bit crackly, but I'll be damned if I wasn't very amused multiple times by the absurdity of the sound design on the monsters, especially when they get hit repeatedly. The voice acting work is fairly solid throughout, and there's quite a lot of it as well. Pretty sure every area has at least one voiced character in it. The main character feels a little dull, but I don't think that is by any fault of the voice actors, or even whoever was directing them. I think the script just doesn't give them a lot to work with. I'll get to why in a second, but let's keep the love fest going just a touch longer. The music is good, but kind of an odd situation with this game. First of all, there was an OST for this game that I'm almost certain has considerably more music than is actually utilized in the game. That being said, I think the music is overall some pretty great MIDI dungeon jams. Another quality choice for the old RPG playlist. And say all these tracks are classics. A lot of them are too murky and dirgy for my taste, but there are a handful of really solid gems on here. My complaint is that it feels like the music isn't utilized well. There's one track per level, and with the length of some of these levels, even with the longer tracks hitting as long as 7 minutes before they loop, they can get pretty tiresome. The OST also has a wide variety of music cues that were obviously designed for emphasis or cutscenes, and these are sorely missing from the game itself, as the lack of specific dramatic music cues to go with the voice acting really leaves the game feeling flat. Although, who knows, if those tracks weren't on the OST, maybe I'd have never thought about it. So where this game stumbles artistically to me is that there's a lot of stuff that happens in this game, but the story isn't about anything. The player character is drab and doesn't really have a consistent voice, to the point where it may have been better for them to be a voiceless protagonist, so at least the player could graft their emotional reaction onto the narrative more easily. It may also be that there's no sense of escalating danger throughout the story. It starts off hopeless and just stays there for pretty much the entire game. There are no real themes explored, so while individual moments can stick out for their peculiarity, there's no real major story beat that will stick with the player. We never meet an articulate member of the opposing forces until the second to last level of the game. We learn bits of lore about how Tempest used to be before the invasion, but learn nothing about the history that led up to the invasion. It's just bad guy bad and has bad guys batting for him. So smash bad guys, and then you don't even get the satisfaction of beating the big bad guy at the end. It all just feels like you're playing a story that takes place in a very well decorated vacuum.
Seek out he who is called the Black Gnarl. He is one of the dark dwarves who dwells in the heart of Fire Mountain.
What is the way to Fire?
The Black Gnarl of the Dark Dwarves of Fire Mountain. Did somebody's 12-year-old write this script? Alright. Time to pass over the Scar and go into Desolation for the final portion of the game. We can either choose to go through Gorge Keep, which is right over here, so you know what? That tree owes us a favor, so we can go that way instead. I mean, it's considered bad form if a primal force of nature owes you a favor and you don't take them up on it, right? Despite all of that, I can see why this game was pretty well received at the time, even being runner-up in a number of magazines' best PC RPG of the year lists, often coming in second place to, Stonekeep? Which tells me that 1995 must have been a pretty bleak year for PC RPGs. Although I can see where Anvil of Dawn might have been considered a breath of fresh air compared to the majority of dungeon crawlers on the market, which often had complex stat systems or required a knowledge of the AD&D rule set to effectively play. It really just stripped the genre down to the gameplay essentials and made it considerably more approachable for novices. Which I'm sure when I was a kid in the 90s I appreciated that. Although nowadays, as a medium-seasoned RPG dude who loves interesting and complicated systems in his games, this one doesn't offer a lot. It has a rudimentary advancement system, where as you attack or use spells you gain experience in either weapons or magic, and you can spend those points on developing certain spell schools or one of the 4 weapon categories. You'll notice I didn't say anything about stats, which brings us back to mistake number 1 from like 20 minutes ago. Choosing balanced stats is a mistake. I feel like you either want to fully commit to strength or magic. So in theory, you could focus on agility instead of strength and rely on getting consistent hits instead of big hits. But remember that the enemy attack timers are based on when you hit them. So hitting 3 times for 10 damage puts you considerably more at risk than swinging 3 times, missing 2, and hitting 1 for 30 points. Strength also gives you carry capacity, which was sometimes a nightmare with only 5 points. The only way to really increase your stats in the game is to equip an amulet that has that stat on it, or temporarily increase it using a potion, and strength and stamina were the only things I ever really concerned myself with buffing. I'm not willing to test it out either, but I can only imagine playing the game with magic as your primary attack tool would be amazingly tedious. You'd probably add hours to your playthrough just watching spell animations, which admittedly, they look great, but they pause gameplay while you make the hand gesture, form the spell, and then hit the enemy with it. And in that delay timer, the enemy will often queue up a free attack that lands as soon as the spell ends. That and hit points are also determined by strength, along with stamina. So learn from me if you're going to play this game and max out strength and stamina. Yeah, let's go through my other mistakes while I'm at it. Not saving intelligently is always a danger when I go back to older games. It bites me on the ass at least once per game, and this one had a couple massive regrets because of how generally not difficult the game is. It would lull me into a false sense of security and then spring a pit trap on me or something and I'd lose a half hour. And the other mistake was picking the axe. Technically any weapon will work, but the two highest damage weapons in the game are both swords. Also, the game never specifies this, but I think hammers fall under hacking weapons too. Because otherwise there's no skill for hammers and there are no axe upgrades for the entire first half of the game. Well, the combat never really gets harder as the game goes on because you skill up and gear up in tandem with the difficulty. The traps and puzzles ramp up to the point where the game finally becomes engaging around here. I think the game peaks in the Iron Titan here, a massive 3-story fortress with some of the gnarliest traps and the best use of an NPC in the game. Speaking of, hey there, big boy. As in, this guy remotely affects gameplay and I think might be legitimately the only person that is saved by our actions in the entire game. We need to scour each level of the fortress to find an item to negate the magic field preventing us from shrinking this giant dude. And I love that they're just using him to block passage through this fortress. Like, this is the easiest way to do that. Seriously, I wish I knew anything about the opposing forces from Desolation in this game, because they seem like some stone cold freaks. Also, I'm gonna give the thing spider babies that are crawling around on the ceiling the last of my monster MVP design awards. They have a lot of tongue and they're very goopy, and I like them. Some reviews I read from the time complained about the simplicity of the puzzle sections, which is bizarre to me as I think they hold up the best gameplay-wise. Well, with one niggling complaint. Balls! Yes, balls. There are a lot of rolling balls in this game, and a number of puzzles require pushing them to roll in a different direction, which is mechanically dodgy in this engine. Sometimes they'll change direction, sometimes they won't. And when you're pushing it into a tight space, sometimes that'll lead to you taking a lot of hits when the ball actually changes direction and just slams into your face repeatedly. But that is like classic blobber jank, and I'd be lying if I said I was mad at the balls, even though they probably killed me more than any monster. I don't know what it is, I find jank deaths in old games really charming. In the quagmire, we find a magical talking sword that holds a grudge against the castellan of the warlord and asks us to free him so he can help us cut him down. So at last, we finally have a potential companion with personal motivation to fight the warlord's army. Also, it is one of the best weapons in the game, which I bring up as a matter of being thorough, but I also feel like it would be distasteful to reduce this obviously sentient object to just its function as a murder implement, even if it is extremely determined to murder the castellan. We also run into the Mirelurk tribe that we hail from, and decide to give ourselves our own version of a hero's welcome. Join the side of good, brothers, or else all shall be slaughtered. Before we confront the castellan of the warlord's stronghold, let's take a quick detour to Fire Mountain and meet up with the Black Gnarl, who's going to whip together that evil-proof box for us. And while we're there, he's going to bless us with one of the rarest delights of old voice acting: mediocre singing. Or I guess mediocre songwriting to be more accurate.
Down through the fight, forging the metal with power and might, bringing together the forces that be, changing the course of your destiny. All I see is the work to be done.
If I may go back into professorial mode for a second, I'll just say I'm not convinced. Listen, this is great, but I feel like it could have used a couple more passes. The meter is forced, the implied harmony is dull, and the crackly audio is the most prevalent accompaniment. Just a solid C effort all around. I love it. Oh, one last hot tip for these last few areas while we're heading to the castellan. Keep a spell reflect buff on and wind walk going to make your life considerably easier. There's a lot of pit traps and monsters that fling spells at you at this point in the game. Alright, this is it. The boss fight of the game. The infamous castellan of the warlord that we learned about, recently. clad in his invincible armor, forged by the warlord and empowered by the dark slag itself. So fearsome is this opponent that the last of our starting companions dies while warning us of his unrivaled strength, the futility of our resistance, the complete hopelessness of the task ahead of us. Cool. Now that that idiot is dead, let's put this evil in this incorruptible doggy bag and work our way down to the Anvil of Dawn to throw it in the trash where that guy belongs.
The Anvil of Dawn awaits.
And the Anvil is a fine last level of the game, in the sense that if it were put as anything but the last obstacle to me completing this game, I would have uninstalled it harder than I did my social life the last couple years. It's a complicated, invisible pressure plate maze with the most annoying enemy in the game, these cave worms. They're kind of a gameplay rug pull because they are the first enemy in the game that almost requires a ranged or polearm weapon to effectively dispatch. They won't chase you, they don't have any projectiles, but they hit harder than the second season of a show you loved being terrible. And they're positioned around corners or adjacent to magic nullification fields, so you can't use offensive spells against them. On the plus side, since I'm typically role-playing in games as a hoarder, I have a thrown weapon that returns itself to my hand, so this will be slow, but I should be... fuck. What? I threw the thing too fast, and it errored itself out of existence. Well, at least the game didn't crash. Guess I'll just use, this one that I have to pick up between every throw. Woo, buddy. Okay, let's chuck this thing into the anvil and get this over with. Oh, hey, evil warlord. Nice to finally meet you. Been up to anything since the credit sequence? No? Cool. Do you want to fight? Also, no? Cool. So this dip gives you the old "I'm unbeatable, join me" speech, which ends with him killing you immediately due to your lack of loyalty. Which, given that I'm supposedly of the evil race here, you'd think it would be like a double agent situation or whatever. Now, I remember from back in the day that if you throw the thing in, it just gets stuck on a ledge and you get murdered as well. But luckily I remember that to get the good ending, you need to cast the resurrect spell on yourself first and just full golem yourself into the anvil. Wait a second, this isn't the good ending. Oh, god damn it. So after reconsulting a walkthrough, I realized that to get the good ending, I needed to get a random item from some druid back by the Temple of Clay. A guy that upon re-examining my footage, I never saw when I was there the first time. So time to trek back through all the most difficult to traverse levels in the game and get this wreath that is only used to get the good ending of the game, as it teleports corpses to safety when they die to prevent the desecration of it. The thing that is killing me right now, and why I pointed out these particular mistakes, is I vividly recall making these exact same mistakes when I played this game in high school. Picking balanced stats, going with the axe, dying to the siren, having to trek halfway back through the world to get this wreath to get the good ending. All of it. I'm not sure whether I should feel comforted in the sense that reminding myself that yes, the Bivdub of 1998 or whatever is the same person as today despite seeming so distant, or should I feel despair in the fact that in all that time my inclination towards carelessness and indecision can cause me to repeat the exact same mistakes of my youth while playing this game. Now we can destroy the evil and receive full credit, and maybe all those assholes back at the castle will stop with all this evil race talk. Or not, I don't care anymore. So did we learn anything? No. I mean, sure, there are admirable qualities to Anvil of Dawn, especially in the art department, but I don't think there are any gameplay, story, design, or life lessons that can be learned that couldn't be learned better from other games. This game is kind of the antithesis to Entomorph in a way, Whereas that game had ramshackle gameplay, but a bizarre setting and energy that makes even the lame gameplay moments stand out, Anvil of Dawn takes very few risks and provides one of the most solid examples of the gameplay from that era, but the setting is so dull that it renders all of the interesting moments almost instantly forgettable. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully it'll be a little bit quicker turnaround for the next episode, and to help that along, let's do something that's a little less nitpicky to figure out why it doesn't work for next time, and go to a light cyberpunk mid-90s abandonware adventure game kind of vibe. Until then, please to do all the YouTube things down there.